Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Two Trees Podcast. This is Martin Listener, your official host of the Two Trees Podcast. And by host, I mean intro guy, because I'm the one that tells you all the cool stuff that's going on with us here at the podcast. We're smack dab in the middle of season 3 of the podcast. We're going to get to that in a minute, and I'm going to let John take over for everybody's benefit on that. But I do need to tell you a few things. First of all, our Facebook page, it's popping, it's thriving, it's awesome. You guys send us a message. We love to respond to you. John puts awesome things on there like all the time. And if he doesn't, some of our awesome moderators, I guess, do we technically have moderators or are there just cool people that post all the time?
No, we just have cool people.
Okay, well, those guys, they're moderators in my eyes, and they've been helping us out quite a bit. So thanks to everybody that posts on there. Also, the website, thetwotreespodcast.org, because we're an organization or something.
I didn't want to pay the extra money.
It was cheaper. That's what it was. But anyway, go on there if you haven't already. There's a spot where you can put your information in. We're not going to sell it and buy a nice building where we can record in. We're happy in my garage. Trust me, no matter if it's in 7 degrees outside or not.
Does this count as the garage?
It's like kind of the backside of the garage.
I don't know what this is.
Are you guys saying garage?
Garage.
Garage?
Garage?
Garage.
Garage?
Yeah, that's Midwestern.
Garage.
Garage is bougie.
Well, it is a garage.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a garage. It's
All
like
right.
where cars go.
I feel fancy.
But anyway, go to the website, put that information in because it sends us a message.
Now I'm paranoid about it. Is it garage?
No, it's garage.
I don't know.
Somebody out there is yelling at their phone the correct pronunciation.
If you know how to pronounce the word where you put your cars, put it on our Facebook page, go to our website, get a little message, and put us the phonetic way how to say the word
garage.
Did you just use phonetic in a sentence?
Yeah,
this is great.
I'm rather intelligent. People don't understand that because I, am usually not. But every now and then.
That's not true.
So go to the website, put your information. It sends us a direct message, and then we know who you people are because you are awesome and fantastically amazing.
That was a very Trump-esque kind of a thing, You're the best. You're awesome.
You're even better than better. Maybe it's the garage fumes or garage. But anyway, go on there and interact with us a little bit more because
what other words am I saying wrong?
we love to get to know you guys even better, and it really helps us with all the support that you put on there. And then the special project that's coming out in April, I need to be mysterious about it so people, stay on the
conference, yes.
The conference project that's coming out in April is all going to be pretty much through the website. So
Beyond Eden, yes.
You'll want to stay tuned to that. Listen to us because we're going to bring you more information. Go to the website. It's going to be all over there. So just stay tuned. You guys are going to love it. I'm so pumped for it. So other than that, season 3 next episode is starting
this is episode 3, right?
I think so.
We haven't got very far. It would be good if it was episode 3 because we're not very far into this book. What we are doing, though, is looking at the patterns, looking at the Old Testament roots and content that is riddled throughout the Gospel of Matthew. And I hope that you are reading the Gospel of Matthew with your friends, that you've got a group together, whether it's you and your wife or it's you and your friends, and you're heading out somewhere fun to talk about your ideas as you've been reading through this Gospel. And the next section of the Gospel that we're going to talk about today, I want to focus in on Joseph, who kind of gets overlooked in the beauty of Mary's story. But Joseph is a very interesting character, and Matthew does some very cool things with Joseph's narrative. But to really see them, you're going to have to overcome a problem that most Western readers have when they read their Bible, and they're called chapters. We think of chapters like the end of an episode. Big number must be the end of something. And those chapters and verses are intended, to help you get the idea of what you're reading. There may be like, I don't know, like a summary above it that somebody has put in there so that you can kind of glance at your page and figure out what's going on. Normally, they're very helpful, especially for devotional reading. But if you're really trying to dig into the literary structure of the book, the chapters are going to mess you up because they don't fall always in the spot where Matthew moves on to another idea. And so they're not an original part of the gospel. Excuse me. Sometimes authors use motifs, reoccurring patterns, and they span chapters or sections. And they are intended by the author for the audience to pick up on. But if you're resetting after every chapter, you're going to miss these because you thought, well, I noticed that in the last chapter, but I'm on to chapter 4 now, so I have to leave that behind. And so we do this all the time when we're reading regular literature. And I think in our effort to honor what Scripture is, we should treat it with respect and with intelligence, and to try not just to look for convenience. I read a chapter a day, but to ask myself, what is Matthew getting at?
It just makes me wonder why really the Bible is the biggest book that we do this with. Because if you're reading a narrative or another type of story, you're not going to forget what you read about in chapter 1 when you're on chapter 5. In fact, it's going to play a huge factor in what you're reading in chapter 5. Like if you just forgot about the setting and the plot throughout the book, this is going to be a brand new experience for you once you introduce a new character or once you introduce something else. But in the Bible, we do seem to break it up into like different sections where it's like, this was very important. So Matthew put it in, chapter 3. That's why it was in this chapter. So it's so interesting to me. But also when you think of like the letters from Paul, you think he sent them to the churches in sections? Like, here's chapter 1.
The next installment.
He got
Like
the whole
Dickens.
letter.
Yeah.
They got the whole letter, and they probably sat down and read it. If you got a letter from Grandma, you're not going to read like, oh, that's page 1. I'll see you tomorrow for page 2, Grandma. Like,
Well,
you're going to.
what about you, Rose? Do you read chapter by chapter, or do you kind of move through?
Are you talking about the Bible or books in general?
Well, both.
Okay. So this year I'm doing something, it's called, I heard about it on another podcast, and it's called book crushing. You like listen to the same book or read the same book over and over and over and over.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, right.
It's not
that.
like crushing.
No. I'm not that
Just
agile.
really like him.
Yeah. I have such a crush on Matthew this year. No, I'm listening to Matthew over and over and over. As soon as I stop it, I start it all over again because it's on the table right now.
Yes.
So I don't pay attention to the chapters at all when I'm doing that because the goal is to read the whole book, So, but a lot of other times I will parse it out by chapter because there's a lot to think about, sometimes even in a verse or 2 or 3 at a time. And so to just keep on going and going and going it's not always conducive to my nature of like sitting and studying. You know what I mean?
So do you think the studying is the reason why we look at it more like this? When you're reading a book, unless it's for your high school project, you're probably not going to do a book study or a book report on it at the end. You're just reading the book for the experience of the book. But with the Bible, I feel like we try to dive in so deep that we have some way to put parameters around what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think also it has to do with your goal. Like most people's goal isn't to really understand the book, especially right now. It's January, so a lot of people are trying to read through the Bible in a year. And so you divide the whole Bible up, and that's what chapters are great at, is it gives you markable progress to push this way. And that's wonderful. There's nothing wrong with stopping at the chapter break. But if you're really trying to unpack a book like Matthew, and you're not trying to say, okay, this year I'm going to read the whole Bible, but you might say, this year I'm going to really understand the Gospel of Matthew, which really is our hope through this podcast, is that by the end of this year, I hope all of us really understand what Matthew's talking about. Man, my throat is all filled with coughs. My apologies, dear listener.
Welcome to January in Ohio.
Ah, yes, it's lovely.
in Martin's garage.
It is very pretty. There's lots of snow and death everywhere around us. It's nice.
Joe, we're going sledding tomorrow.
Are
John.
you?
Oh.
No, you and me. Let's go.
No, I'm not going.
Come
sledding.
on,
I'll
we got to
tell
get
that
you
right
out
now.
there.
Although we do have a ski trip coming up. Are you going on the ski trip? The
I
church's
didn't know
ski
about
trip?
it.
What? That's okay. I'll fill you in.
I'm in.
All right. Well, where did the chapters come from? A lot of people assume, they were inspired by, Moses when he wrote the Ten Commandments. He came down and he was like, and these are the breaks for the Torah. When you really won't find them through most of Christian history. They're not ancient, but they are very practical. They were first introduced by the Archbishop of Canterbury in 1227. So way into the Middle Ages, the first time that anyone broke things into chapters was Stephen Langton. He's the first guy to do it. The Wycliffe Bible, which came around in like the 1300s, the end of the 1300s, was the first Bible ever printed that used this system. So it's not something that's ancient. It is very practical, though, and you can understand why books have it today. This concept, it was super successful. Like when it came out and people read the Wycliffe Bible with its chapters, they were like, wow, this is really helpful. I want more chapters and verses, and this is nice. And so in 1448, the system was applied also to the Old Testament by a rabbi named Nathan. And so the New Testament kind of kicked off the whole chapter and verse thing. And then people thought, well, it's really convenient to have it in the New Testament. Why doesn't someone go back through the Old Testament and do the same thing? And so really it was driven, I hate to say this, but by marketing. It's a really helpful tool, kind of like tabs on the edge of a Bible or those kinds of things. It's a way to help you move through the book quicker. But it isn't something that most of the church has used through most of our history. The chapter and verse divisions that we're using today didn't come around until the Reformation. There was a guy called Robert Estienne, people call him Stephanus, and he was a French printer in Geneva. Right? He printed a lot of John Calvin's stuff. And when he put together the version of the Bible, like the Geneva Bible that was printed there, obviously in Geneva, they had a specific set, and they wanted it to become the standard. And it's the same one we're using today. And so there have been different chapter breaks in the past. These are the ones that are used today. So when Matthew sat down to write the Gospel of Matthew, I don't think he thought, on to chapter 2. Instead, he was just flowing. He was telling the story. And instead, he seems to have been thinking not in terms of numbers, but in terms of movements. If you're musical, maybe you can understand this better than someone who's very nuts and bolts. This idea of a reoccurring rhythm that moves through the text. And he's purposefully connecting it into Old Testament concepts. And he introduces this in the genealogy. He's purposefully connecting us back to these other stories. Remember, genealogies are about people, not just about a list of names, but connecting stories. And so he's continuing this conversation. He's bearing witness to the God of his fathers. And the context is the Old Testament. So if we're going to understand the New Testament, we need to understand the Old Testament.
So I think the men that put this together really nailed it because the chapters and the verses are so well organized. You know how when we're reading our books and we do not have the same copy or the same pagination and Jonah and...
Did you say pagination? Yeah. I'm going to say that one too. Garage. I was working on my pagination in the garage. I'm learning tons. Yes, keep going.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is good.
Anyway, and we tried to stutter around like, well, in my book, it's page 121, but okay, we're all in chapter 2, and it's about 4 paragraphs in, about partway down. It's super annoying, you know?
Yeah.
So this is really helpful for discussion time and for when you're, teaching Bible study or whatever, because you can say somebody read verse, 31 and everybody knows what that means. What if we all just had this big sea of words and had to, what would we do? I have no idea what we'd do. So I'm thankful this was put like this, even though, as you keep saying, the Westerners demand it. I'm glad that we did.
Oh, me too. I think having chapters is awesome.
It kind of makes me think, though, because just with the whole idea of that the verses were not even intended until the 1300s, like individual verses. I was understanding the chapters, but then when you said something about the verses as well, it just kind of stuck in my head because, these people were supposed to memorize the scriptures and were to put it on their heart and on their foreheads and like understand it. So the passages that they were memorizing were not the same ones that I remember from Awana. They were like what we would consider books
Yeah,
or
they
chapters.
were memorizing paragraphs, song lyrics, and they understood the movement of the text.
But when you say, like, if it's just a sea of words, how would we be able to know where we're at? But back in the day, they were able to do that because they put so much emphasis on remembering it and utilizing the text that it was easy for them to know where you were talking about.
Martin, you could never do a sword drill if you did not have
Exactly.
the chapters and verse.
Fastest sword driller.
But in today's world, in today's society, when we talk about this, we don't know the scripture near as well as they did back then.
Yeah, and also we're not reading it with the same expectation of seeing patterns. It's like I have a copy of the Bible that doesn't have chapters and verses. And it's interesting, when I sit down to read it, I move much farther in my reading because I'm not moving past a giant number 5, which looks like an appealing truck stop. And I can just pull in here and say, hey, I read my chapter.
So, not to digress too much more, but do you feel that way about study Bibles too? Is it difficult because you get distracted by the notes or the...
Yeah, I am easily distracted. And I know that I shouldn't be. I'm not sure who puts them out. I think it's Crossway, but they have they have just one book, like the book of Genesis or the book of Exodus. And on one page is the text, and the other page is just a completely blank page. And I use those a lot because I love correlating, and I will be like, oh, that reminds me of a verse. Let me go find it. And I'll chase rabbits all day, every day. But if I'm really trying to deep dive into this text, what is Matthew saying? Not what are the Gospels saying? Not how does this interact in creating like a gospel harmony? But really, like, what's the flow of thought here? What's the rhythm that Matthew's laying out for me? It helps me to be focused. Or sometimes I used to copy and paste it onto like a Word document so that I'm only working, like I'm only studying this today. And that helps me because I'm really distractible.
Well, that's how I am with annotated versions of anything. Like if there's annotating, then I'm all over that, and sometimes I get lost in that instead of in the text. So I can see where that would be a deal. It's kind of almost like giving respect to the single book that you're reading, written by the author the way it was intended to be read, when you just let everything else go and just read the text. No chapters, no verses, no study notes.
I think it's very helpful to do that. Otherwise, what you end up with is, this is what I think the Gospels say. And that's helpful, and that's really wonderful, but it can lead to proof texting, where you're just looking for another verse that reminds you of what you're thinking here. Instead of really looking at where is Matthew going with this? Why does he lay out this genealogy this way? And then when the story picks up, I don't want to be thinking of the Christmas story through the eyes of Luke. I want to be thinking about what Matthew is talking about. And it will help you, or at least it has helped me, to focus in. And I notice things that I wouldn't ordinarily pick up because I'm distracted by my search for other threads of the story that run off further into the distance. And so we're not going to do genealogy today. I know, Martin, you're very upset about that.
I about didn't show up for this one because you said no genealogy.
Yeah, well, you can go read it again. But the gospel describes the birth of Jesus. At the end of the genealogy, right? We're getting to this part. His birth is both natural and it's supernatural. It is a physical thing, but it's also a supernatural thing. God created the life of the body that is going to be Jesus. The Spirit is going to move, and he is going to create within the womb of the woman Jesus. Not to say that the Son didn't eternally exist, because he did. But there is a moment when Mary is not pregnant, and then she is. This should remind you that there is an Old Testament story that we can look back to for context. And here I just said that we shouldn't do this, and here I am doing it. But I think Matthew intends us to. Adam is made from the dust of the ground and then brought into the garden. And so Adam is literally walking dirt. And instead, with Jesus, we find that he is made from woman. It's a fulfillment of this promise that's given to Eve way back in the day. So Adam and Eve's story is loaded into the story that Matthew is preparing. And so I want to have that connection in my mind when I see Matthew is linking ideas. I don't want to just run off randomly to find verses that remind me of this. I want to know, why is he making a big deal about the virgin birth? Because this has got to be for a lot of people, this has been a distraction from their ability to believe in the birth of Jesus in this way. Matthew could have just covered this up. It could have been something that he just didn't talk about. Instead, he leans into it. He wants people to know this is a supernatural event. And so Adam is formed by God. Life is breathed into him. And Jesus is not formed of the dust, but he's formed of a virgin. Both are supernatural, and they show the will and the glory of God the Maker. Eve is even closer to what we see with Jesus, right? Adam falls asleep, and God forms Eve out of the man. It says, if you have a older Bible, it may say rib, it may say side. Literally, he seems to split Adam and make female out of man. And so it was
Eve.
The
first nuclear bomb.
The first nuclear bomb?
God split the atom.
Oh, dad joke.
I have a button for this. There it was. Okay. So it was Eve who was given this great promise that through her would come the serpent crusher, the deliverer. Jesus is often described by the New Testament as the new or the better Adam. This is where they're getting this from. God begins this description by having a supernatural birth. Just as Eve was born through Adam, this new Adam, would be born through Mary. So what you're seeing is symmetry. It's a reversal with the intention of fulfillment. So we're not looking for just any connections. We're trying to notice purposeful patterns in the text. Personally, I don't like saying things like, look, the text is definitely saying something, if it's not clear. Instead, I like to say things like, oh, it reminds me of, or when I read this, I couldn't help but think about, this makes me think of, and I'm not going to break fellowship over this. If someone says, I just think it's talking about Jesus, then I'm going to say, okay, that's wonderful. Let's talk more about Jesus. But the New Testament authors seem to have this idea that Jesus is the new Adam, that he is come. There is this fulfillment of the breaking of Eve and Adam has come to its completion. He is the better Adam. So the story of humanity is definitely one that moves from glory to shame, right? Adam and Eve were priests in Eden, and they're exiled to walk the cursed earth, right? Didn't God know that a virgin birth would make life really stinky for Mary? I mean, couldn't God have waited till after they were married and said, hey, Joseph, don't sleep with Mary. I'm going to create a babe within her womb. He seems to purposefully make this difficult for Mary. Right, the angel is to tell Joseph what's going on. Wouldn't it have hurt to drop by maybe the synagogue and tell everybody, hey, you see Mary over here? I'm about to make a baby in her womb. Please don't call her names or ostracize her. I mean, the angel already stopped by to see Joseph. Why couldn't he stop by to see the chief of the synagogue? Mm-hmm. Or show up at the next wedding or birthday party or whatever? Why does God intentionally let the family bear this shame?
Are you going to have an answer for this?
Yeah, I think so.
I am really ready to hear it.
Do you have an answer?
No, I do not have an answer for this question. I have always felt for Mary throughout her entire story. And I know that she is a better person than I am, and she was chosen by God, and she accepted the honor of carrying his son, and she knew what she was getting into. But still, as a woman, I have felt for her.
Well, it's interesting because Mary had to have complained at least once, right? I mean, 70-mile trip on a donkey, 8.5, 9 months pregnant. Like, she's complaining. She's not sitting there, so blessed. I'm so blessed. I'm so blessed. I'm so blessed. I'm so blessed. She's struggling with it. I understand that. But I think I have an answer to the questions, is that, God doesn't really care about people always say it's God's time, not man's time. But it's also, it's God's measuring stick, not man's measuring stick. God understands what he's doing when he's making it hard for Mary intentionally. He's not making it hard for Mary. He's making it hard for Mary if you compare Mary's life to how man thinks life should be compared. And it's like, man, that really stinks. Mary had kind of a rough time going through all this because she does not match up to a good person in the eyes of society. But in the eyes of God, she's the best option. And it's not even close because her faithfulness to him. And so God's not intentionally making it hard for Mary. He's just not caring what mankind is going to say about Mary. He's doing what he knows is right because he is righteous.
I'm going to disagree. I like the thought, and I've thought it in the past.
Are we breaking fellowship?
Oh, definitely not. I'm going to tell you this is how I feel. I'm going to share some of my thoughts.
good.
I think God definitely knows and cares. I think he feels and understands much deeper than we think that he does. Instead, I see this as the fulfillment of the song, of the rhythm, of the pattern. Man is been moved from glory into exile. So to reverse that, you need to move from exile into glory.
Sure.
Is there a woman who is more glorified than Mary in our culture? She is blessed among all women. There is this moment where potential and very
But not
real,
during her life as
not
much.
well later in her life, for sure. When we find that she is there at the death of Jesus, you don't think the apostles were stopping by to ask Mary's opinion about things? You gotta, especially John. She's living with John later on. He's caring for her, but we find that there is a purposeful.
But you're still talking a pretty small number of people.
Maybe within
glorifying
her
her.
now.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
But
But,
I mean-
now, there's millions of people, right?
But it's not a question of how much or how easy this was for her. But Mary was part of what God was doing, and I think that's where you and I would agree.
Definitely.
But it isn't that he just didn't care; it's that he made her part of what he was doing.
I wouldn't say God didn't care, like as far as he doesn't care about Mary and her struggle, but he's not concerned. His plan is not concerned with how mankind is going to react to what he's doing.
Oh, with that I agree, because he's doing something much bigger.
Correct.
I think that the fact that the story moves from exile into glory
Sure.
is shared by Mary. And for the rest of you don't think his brothers had opinions about this later on in life? We know for sure his brothers didn't love and appreciate Jesus during his earthly ministry. There was a shame that they have to have borne that God could have removed and chose not to.
But anytime you're moving, and this is, kind of chemistry, if you want to look at it this way, anytime you're moving something from one state to the other, like you're saying, from shame to glory, there has to be a catalyst. There has to be something that starts the reaction that moves to that. And most of the time in chemistry, I know it's kind of a stretch, but most of the time those are like rough events. There's a fire, there's an explosion, there's something.
Yeah.
So, the catalyst is not going to be something that leaves the environment unscarred. And so when you're looking at Mary, it's not like this is going to be a glorious event that everybody's just going to be happy-go-lucky. There has to be something that's going to leave.
real shame.
Yeah, it's going to leave a
very real
trailblaze
pain.
behind her that is going to allow for this change.
But I think it's the presence in the story of this arc that moves from, and if you think of God as a storyteller, as the maker of things, a creator who is weaving into time his reversal of these things, we find that he begins his life in the one place that every child of his day, would not have chosen. I do not want to have my parentage questioned. And Mary, in particular, is asked to, and I love the part where it says, she treasured these things in her heart. The wise men show up, the shepherds are there. There are moments where she definitely feels vindicated, but you can't read her story without feeling a very real sense of empathy for her, because she's
Definitely.
being asked to walk through pain. And the other person who does this is Jesus. He is going to be meek and lowly. He is going to say, blessed are the poor in spirit. And I think in many ways he has to have thought of his mother. There's a sense in which this story is much bigger than just Mary. And I'm a Protestant, and I'm not afraid of this. People are always after me on one side or the other about this. Either I think too highly of Mary or too lowly of Mary. I'm going to tell you I love her. And I love her story in the scripture and what she is to the history of the church and to the history in the book is beautiful. And to just throw it away as, but she had a baby and the baby was really cute and saved the world. Let's get on to that part, is I think to miss the part of what it would have been like for Joseph to take Mary as his wife.
And not to get into like existential things of like, well, what if Mary just didn't do it or just, didn't go on with it or whatever. I think it shows also the intuitiveness of God, because he knows Mary's faithfulness and he knows Mary's heart and he understands that. And so he didn't really ask her. The angel didn't come down and said, Mary, God's kind of thinking maybe we do this.
Please
Are
sign
you
this
okay
waiver.
with that? Right. So there was no asking of it, and I know that's not what you're intending, but it was just like, this happens. In
Yeah,
fact, it may have already
exactly.
happened, and you just don't know it. So, like,
So
buckle up here. We're going.
Mary is told about it, and she willfully enters into this. She with a full heart. She's excited. I am blessed, and this is going to be wonderful. It's going to be hard. It's going to be upsetting, but it's going to be a glorious thing.
So much in there about the perspective of Mary. Like that, I think if everybody looked at that verse just from the perspective of Mary.
Well, and this is what I mean by dig into the chapter.
Yes.
And don't be like, well, I have to push on to the end of it, or no, just enjoy that and go think about it.
Just how many times does Jesus show an example of something that is like bad? We don't like it. And his response is, thank you. Or his response is like, glory to God because I get this. Mary is that way right away, instantaneously.
Yeah. Well, Paul is going to say this later on. He says, I've become a fool. You guys think I've lost my mind, especially when he's talking to the Corinthians. They don't seem to respect what he's up to at all.
But it's like the angel is right there, and the angel tells her, and her initial knee-jerk response is, yes, thank you. I mean, just like she knew what she was up against. It wasn't like 2 days later, she's like, what did I get myself into? Like she knew all of this stuff we're talking about.
Well,
and
you
her instant reaction was, yes, I'm so thankful for this.
You bring up an interesting point in that the angel shows up to talk about it. Remember, creation exists in two parts. There is a supernatural world and there is a physical world. The spiritual world is well aware of what's going on. There is a sense in which the whole world is about to shift and to change. God the Son just incarnated onto the earth. Satan himself shows up to tempt him. This is, red alert as far as like the host of heaven and the hosts of hell are concerned. Everyone is hyper-focused, I think, on what's going on.
Do you think there was like giddiness in the angel's voice when he's coming to Mary?
Yeah,
like,
I think so.
Come on, Mary,
this is going to be amazing. Yeah.
We always say like, Mary, fear not. And he was probably like, Mary, you're not going to believe it.
Yeah,
you're not going to believe it.
But we definitely get this idea from the humanity side that we who believed we knew what we were talking about, we look like fools. Because the creative hand of God, if he can turn dust into mankind, he can take the womb of a virgin and make it fertile. This is the creative hand of God. And I want to emphasize this movement from shame to glory. Once again, we find the kingdom, the gospel, begins with the humble and the powerless, the outcast, the exile. That's Mary. And it's Joseph. Both of them are going to be thought less of by their relatives who claim to be wise, but in reality are fools. So Joseph longs to defend Mary's reputation. He's described as a just man. He doesn't want to divorce her. He doesn't want to throw her away. And there's not many people in the Bible that are called a just man. As a matter of fact, as far as I know, there's 3. Noah, Job, and Joseph. That's a really great list. And the reason I think that Joseph isn't talked about as much is because he's in the story right next to Mary. And she shines so brightly in the text that sometimes we can lose what's happening with Joseph in this story. Would you guys read Micah 6, 7 through 8?
Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000s of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has told you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God?
So when the Bible calls Joseph a just man, here we have in Micah the definition of this. He loves the Lord. He does justice. He loves mercy. So if you're out there and you're wondering, how can I please God? Is it in giving more money? Is it in reading more chapters? In the ancient Hellenistic world, they were focused on rituals. Do I have to offer enough sacrifices? No. Do justice. Love mercy. Walk humbly with your God. The firstborn is dedicated. It reminds me of Samuel, right? The prophet Samuel is this miracle child. But most importantly, it reminds me of the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross. What does it look like to walk as citizens of the kingdom? It means not to be hyper-focused on the opinions of this world. And that's, I think, what Martin was pointing out earlier. This broken world does not do justly. It does not love mercy. It does not walk humbly with your God. And so even if the world around you fails to understand it, if you're going to be a just man, just woman, it is to seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. And so there's prophecy in play. There's Old Testament background. When you're reading a chapter, realize that they didn't have the chapters when they started, and they didn't have bold font or highlighters. Instead, they used repeated phrases, words that come back over and over and over again. This is a way of emphasizing that there is a pattern in the text. Look for it. In this chapter, you're going to see two phrases: in a dream and the phrase written by the prophet. When you're reading the Christmas story according to Matthew, these two phrases, in a dream, which is present revelation of God, and according to the prophet, or written by the prophet, which is to imply the past revelation of God. Matthew is about to do something interesting. He weaves 5 revelations brought through dreams and 5 ancient prophecies through the prophets, and he applies them all to the birth of Jesus. So you have, in this story, 10 prophecies given here. 10 being an incredibly important number, especially if you're reading Genesis. The Lord speaks 10 times in the creation of the world. He gives 10 commandments over and over and over. We see the hyper focus and importance on the number 10. When you hit Matthew, he doesn't invent new patterns. He uses the same ones that we read in the Old Testament. 5 present dreams and 5 Old Testament prophecies. The chapters will mess you up, okay? So don't stop with the chapter. Push on. Every time you see these lines, kind of underline it. Think about it. And so the number 10, it's deeply connected to the idea of the voice and the rule of God. When God speaks 10 times, there's 10 commandments, there's 10 plagues of Egypt. I believe it's a historical fact that there really were 10, but I also think it is a pattern. It's an artistic, beautiful, meaningful thing. I think it's history, and I think it's art. He did these things on purpose. It's not arbitrary. He didn't just run out of things to do in Egypt when he hit 10. He's like, I can't think of anything else worse than that. I'm just going to land the plane here. He's doing it on purpose. So the number 10 becomes connected to the idea of the kingdom of God, to the rule of God. When you think in terms of creation, when you think in terms of the law, and when you think in terms of his judgment on the nations. And so we have Joseph, right? He's the husband, he's the guy, and he kind of disappears from the story, but he also has a lot of significance. I don't believe it's a coincidence, but I think it's an act of God's providence that Joseph, who is given many dreams here, shares a name with an Old Testament character who is famous for having dreams. Joseph in the Old Testament has dreams while he's in prison. He has dreams, and he gets this really cool Technicolor coat. It's not really Technicolor, but it is many-colored. And Joseph in the Old Testament is going to share a lot of similarities with Joseph in the New Testament. They're different people. They're real people. But God is weaving the story, and he's allowing these patterns to be there, and Matthew is pointing them out. They're both given prophetic dreams. Both of them are rejected by their families. Both of them are protectors and providers. This is not reincarnation or anything like that. It's just a pattern and a sign, I believe, of the sovereignty of God, a purposeful connection in the text. So let's look at one of Joseph's dreams. Let's go to...
Do you think there's so many connections because they both have a faithfulness towards God?
I think so, but I think you also have it because Matthew was thinking about it. It's not an accident that Matthew makes such a big deal about the visions that Joseph has. Luke doesn't do this to the same extent.
So do you think it's like, it's just they're more aligned with what God is doing? That's why these things are maybe happening, and that's why they're being utilized in that way?
Probably.
So Matthew's trying to point it out and say, like, look, there is a repeating pattern here. When you are faithful to God, good things happen and God moves through you.
And I'm not trying to say that Joseph had to do this because it was foreordained. I'm pointing out that the way God worked in the Old Testament
Is
is the
same.
way he's working in the New. It's almost as though you can tell these are the same artist at work. He's bringing these things into shape that's recognizable.
Yeah, so it's not that God is looking for a type.
No.
Like, hey, you're a Joseph too. Let me use you.
Yeah, this is, when Matthew writes about it, Matthew is doing that. Matthew's saying, okay, I'm going to present this in a way that they're going to get. I'm going to make sure everyone knows he's a provider. He's a guy having prophetic dreams. He's a guy who's protecting people. And everyone's going to know, hey, this reminds me of the last Joseph. And he was a good guy.
Right.
I like that guy. But we also recognize he had an absolute horrific family life. He moves from chaos into glory. This Joseph is going to walk that same path, and it is going to find its fulfillment, not in the ease in this world, but in the life of Jesus. And so going back, Rose, I don't think it's so much about Mary herself as much as it is she is sharing in the mission of the kingdom of God. It's about what Jesus is doing in the world. You look like you're having thoughts of
I have
disagreement.
so many. No, not disagreement. Just lots of thoughts. I'm just keeping all these things and pondering them in my heart.
Oh, throw them out. Let's beat them around.
Okay, so my first one. This is backtracking, but I can tell we're getting ready to switch topics here. So before we move away,
Yeah, okay.
when you talk about Mary being a virgin, that is prophesied.
Uh-huh.
So what did they think that was going to look like? And it says
Oh.
a virgin will conceive.
Well,
and
that
then,
word in the Old Testament can be used to mean a very young girl. And so it could have been that, a very young girl would have a child. And that's not unheard of. It's unusual, but it's not unheard of. But God uses that and says, oh, you thought I just meant this. I really am going to do something miraculous that you didn't see coming. And it's surprising. And it's this sense of, oh, wow, only God could do that. It's not someone saying, oh, well, I can twist this prophecy to be about me. When you read the New Testament, that word specifically means a woman who has not had sexual intercourse. That's a definite, this is not someone who has had a baby in the normal fashion. This is an act of God. In the same way that God made Adam, the same way that God made Eve, he has made the Redeemer. And you may have thought that this would be just another king, but this king is unlike anyone who's ever come before. This is not Maher-shalal-Hash-Baz, who we find in the Old Testament prophecy. This is something bigger, more profound than anything we could have guessed at.
Which leads me to my second question, and this is probably going to sound weird, and you're going to shoot it down, and I'm fine with that because I've already shot it down.
Oh no!
So when it says that the Holy Spirit will overshadow you, is that okay? Is that when you said this is like an Old Testament story, I thought you meant literally creation, where it says the Spirit of the Lord hovered
Over the
face
waters.
of the
I think
waters.
that's exactly.
So is this the same kind of concept where the Spirit is hovering over the waters, then he comes and hovers over Mary, and out of both of those things come a creation?
So on the Divine Council page today, just to date the episode, they were talking about this exact same thing.
Oh, okay.
And there was relation to the Genesis 6 passage, which we won't go into on this podcast. Maybe another one down the road, but not this one. And they brought up that same thing about the Spirit hovering over the chaos of the world before creation, and how through the Spirit,
Moving from chaos to order.
but through the Spirit, right? Like through that is how it was able to become. And so it's the same thing with Mary.
Yeah, you're going to see it again at the birth of Jesus' ministry, where the Spirit of God hovers over the waters.
Well, that's what I was going to, as you know, I'm rereading Paradise Lost, and it says in there that the Spirit hovered and the waters became pregnant or something like that, and back in, the creation story. And that's what made me, when we were talking about Mary, I was like, this reminds me of that line from there. And then I thought, this is too much. I'll have to ponder it in my heart. And then you're like, what are you thinking about?
No, I think that's a great thought. I love that you pointed it out. I don't know for sure. I mean, Matthew doesn't come out and say absolutely this, but you can't read it and not think about it. I mean, it seems almost to be a one-to-one correspondence that the God who made is making again.
Yeah, and I mean, we already said that it goes back to Adam and Eve and how creation came through, how life became. And I think it's clear as day in the Genesis passage that talks about that with the Spirit hovering. So, he's trying to point out the idea that God is able to create life out of nothing. And whether he actually just changed the DNA in her body,
right.
but then he's saying this is how it happened. He's not saying the scientific way, but God said that he created life through the Spirit. And now again, he's saying he's creating life through the Spirit.
Yeah, when God made creation, it was both spiritual and physical. The same is happening in the birth of Christ.
Yeah.
Both worlds are at play again.
And Matthew's pointing it out.
Yeah, let's look at one of the dreams. I think
one more thing.
Oh, yeah, go
before
ahead.
we move on. So Mary says in her Magnificat, she says, "From now on, all nations will call me blessed." I don't think she was thinking about what the gossipy neighbors were going to be saying. She knew the Lord was working on her, and she was willing to do this thing. I love that. She says he's the Almighty, has done great things. There's not a thought in her mind or anything she ever says that seems to be what we would think that she would be thinking.
the quote that comes to my mind is when it talks about Jesus in the crucifixion. For the joy that was set before him,
Right, that's
he endures the shame. In a very real way, Mary understands this, and Joseph understands this, and they are entering into this together. Adam and Eve did not. As a matter of fact, their first real conversation between each other is, "The woman you gave me. Oh, don't you talk to me that way." And then their children are a mess. There is this debacle of family right away. Jesus is the opposite. He is the redemptive arc of this. And so we find those stories.
I still think that's so important because, like you're saying, it's Mary's knee-jerk reaction. I mean, just imagine anytime anything has ever happened to you that is in any form negative connotation, you've never reacted instantaneously with joy, love, peace, long-suffering, any of those things. You never have, and maybe some of you people are better than me, I don't know. But if anything, even the most slight inconvenience of my life, my first response is never positive.
my soul magnifies the Lord.
I mean, imagine
so
if you could
the-
say
I
that.
love
Let
that.
me jump in here. So the fact that she is acting this way is proof of the presence of the Holy Spirit.
Right.
Yeah.
That there is love and joy and peace and long suffering. These are the fruit of the Spirit.
And I think Mary, and this is me kind of putting it onto this, but I think Mary has prepared herself for an event like this by allowing God to work in her heart, by allowing God to prepare her for a time when this is going to happen. And I fall victim of this. I always say, if God would just tell me to build a boat, then I'd know what to do with my life, right? But it's like I haven't done near the preparation to say yes with a joyful, loving heart that Mary does at whatever, 14, 15 years of age, however old she is. But she is so ready for it that her instantaneous reaction is, thank God I've been waiting forever for this. Let's do it.
And she's speaking in a very real way for all of us. Not just, but Eve also longing for this. All of humanity has longed for this, and it's happening. She's going to have to bear shame, but it's going to lead towards beauty. If it means unity with God, that she is willing to give up everything in order that she might attain Christ. Paul has a great line real similar to this too. Let's jump to the text in Matthew 1:20 and pick it up in verse 20.
But as he considered these things, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream,
Okay,
saying,
let's pause there. Where does the angel appear?
in a dream.
In a dream. So he's a dreamer. This is a dream vision. And the angel says,
Joseph, son of David.
and we talked about that already. That's not his dad. He is being linked to the king. So you would expect, a Gideon moment, right? Joseph, son of David. You're actually not going to be very involved in this, but I have a job for you. Maybe you thought this was you, but here's what's happening.
Do not fear to take Mary as your wife, for which is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit.
So he's up late. No doubt he's praying, stressing about this. And the spiritual veil is lifted and God reveals the truth. It's not a story about him. The main character is her. This is a reversal from how most people would view history. The wife is there to support the husband. Here, the husband is there to support the wife. There's this beautiful upside downness to what the world expected and what Joseph's role is going to be. He's the son of David, not a Maccabee, not a Roman, not a Sadducee, the son of David. Now the storyline begins to take shape. Now, the ruler of the world at the time was Octavian. We call him Augustus. He's the son of Caesar. Well, he's not exactly the son of Caesar. He's adopted. It's interesting that the most powerful man in the world was not actually the son of the king, but he was considered to be the son of the king. Ancient peoples didn't really see a difference. Jesus is a son of David, just like Caesar is, or Augustus is the son of Caesar. It's connected, his role, his place. He's the adopted son, and they didn't make a difference. This was just as real as anything else, as though he had been physically born of the line. And so Joseph is a son of David. That makes Jesus the son of David twice over. This child is the creation of the Holy Spirit, right? That should bring Genesis stuff to mind. Look at verse 21.
She will bear a son, and you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins.
Jesus is the name in the Old Testament, Joshua, Yeshua. Why not call him Moses? Why Joshua?
Or Adam.
Yeah, or Adam. The Messiah was supposed to be a second Moses. It's interesting that he uses this name, but when I think of Moses and I think of Joshua, I give them very different characteristics. Moses is a lawgiver, but Joshua is a conqueror. Joshua is the one who brought fire and death to the giants. It's Joshua who led the people into the promised land. And it's under Joshua that the wandering ends and Israel finds rest in the land of promise. Jesus is going to do the same things. He is casting out demons. There's that connection to the giants. He goes to Mount Hermon and is transfigured. He is bringing the people rest. He is conquering the land, not physically, but spiritually and permanently, bringing a kingdom not simply to the children of Isaac and Abraham, but to the whole world. Look at verse 23.
22, all this took place to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel.
So there's the pattern. A dream in the present, backed up by revelation in the past. This is weaving together old and new. So when we read Matthew, this first book of the New Testament, don't think of it as something disconnected from the Old Testament. Matthew didn't sit down and be like, all right, boys, hand me, sharpen my quill. I'm going to write the New Testament. He just thought he was part of this ongoing saga. This is the next tale in the Messiah's promise coming. This is what's going on. It's not one or the other. It's both. So here is one of the 5 Old Testament prophecies quoted in the birth story. Matthew must have been thinking about this. Maybe he was talking to Mary or Joseph. He is seeing the present in light of the past. So this quote comes from Isaiah 7 and 8, and it's a bit more complex than it appears on the surface. To us, prophecy typically just means prediction. Give me lottery numbers. Who's going to win the next, pennant, or what's going on. Prophecy is telling some future event. It's one-dimensional. It's straightforward. Biblical prophecy is almost never one-dimensional, almost never straightforward. It can be, but usually it's much deeper. Look at the past, the present, and the future in one statement, in one image. Prophecies often have a reference point in the past, an immediate context in the present, and point to a future, deeper fulfillment. For instance, these prophecies work on all 3 levels: past, present, and future. I think this is one reason that everyone gets in prophecy fights. It definitely says this, and someone else says, no, I think it's future. And the answer is
yes.
Yes, it's doing something bigger than you might think. Let me give you the context of the prophecy. Judah is struggling, and times are tough. King Ahaz is worried about how things are going. Things don't look good. There are powers rising in the east, Babylon, Assyria, and King Ahaz feels very small. The prophet Isaiah receives a promise, a sign, and he tells the king what to look for. A young girl is going to give birth to a son, and before that son grows old enough to know good from evil, the threats to Judah will disappear. That's a great promise. Ahaz, though, is unimpressed. This sign, this promise, it doesn't impress him at all, and he turns to idols and answers for help. When the rabbis read this text in the years to come, they saw it as a present promise to Ahaz, but they also recognized in it messianic notes. This has something to do with the coming Messiah. It seems to sound a lot like God's promise of a coming deliverer, and it has hints of Emmanuel. What does Emmanuel mean?
God with us.
God with us. In the present, Isaiah does have a child, and the name is Maher-shalal-hash-baz. It's the greatest name in the Old Testament. I love it. And before Maher-shalal-hash-baz grows up to know right from wrong, the threat to Israel and Judah disappears. So it has an immediate context. But they didn't call Maher-shalal-hash-baz God with us. In a very real sense, it pointed towards a deeper truth. Matthew is thinking the same thing. You thought this was done in the Old Testament? No. God is doing something much bigger. This prophecy goes on to talk about thorns and briars. That's Garden of Eden stuff. Judgment of the kingdoms of the world. And when Emmanuel comes, the world will be upended and never be the same. They were looking for a deliverer to bring them beyond just the threat of the moment, but someone who would set things right. They were looking for the Christ. And we sing about it in Christmas carols. Rose, I know you love
Nothing
Christmas
I love
carols.
like a good Christmas carol.
Okay, I really did not know that when I was saying about the Christmas carols like 5 episodes
Yeah,
ago.
Rose hates them. So they're not a
I was like
favorite
going
of
deep. I
hers.
was like,
He is strong.
like,
Rose
man,
would
some of
gladly
these
not
Christmas
sing
songs
them.
hit it right on the nose, and Rose is like, yeah, they're really bad.
Yeah, well, the line in Joy to the World, no more let sin and sorrows grow, nor thorns infest the ground. It's quoting Isaiah. This prophecy is bigger than just the line that is talked about here that Matthew quotes. It's part of a much bigger one. Matthew does this because he wants you to go back and read what Isaiah said. Listen to it in what I'm saying now, but understand that it has a bigger, more complex issue at play. It had a past context with Ahaz, but now you see the fulfillment. The Son of David, an everlasting kingdom, the restoration of justice and righteousness, the zeal of the God of hosts. I mean, how can that be? How can a man reign forever? He can't. How can his be the kingdom of God and the kingdom of David? How, when the Maccabees, right? Those guys were super zealous. And all these other zealous people, they failed to advance the meter at all. Now it's going to happen. Not by might nor by power, but the will of God is at work. He is going to push the needle.
It kind of makes me just think from a scientific standpoint, I know this, but when you're talking about prophecy in the past, the present, and the future, when you just have an understanding that God doesn't work on the spectrum of time and that he can see the beginning and the end, he is the beginning and the end, we know that and we say that, but it's like he can understand what it is. It almost makes you feel like when you get to heaven or when Jesus completes everything, that time will just disappear. We think that we will reign everlasting because we'll just never run out of time.
Yeah.
But what if time just goes away? Like, we can't even comprehend that thought.
We should
and
do a
it's such a
rambling
deep
on
thought.
time at some point.
But it's this idea of like we're constantly looking forward for this betterness or this eternalness or this fulfillment of something, and it's because it does, and it will repeat itself because God works in patterns, like we're trying to talk with this now. But once it is complete, there will be such a difference because we won't be looking forward to anything. We will be experiencing God in the presence. And that's like something we can't even wrap our head around. But we can see the grace and the fulfillment of God because he continually does that. And every time he moves and works, it is a better and closer representation of what is ultimately to come. When we're talking about Moses, yeah, that was great. When we're talking about all these other guys. But then when Jesus comes, he really gives you a glimpse of what it should be and is going to be.
That's right.
And it's like, that is such a promise and something to hope for moving forward. It's like, that should get you excited. That should get you pumped up.
Awkward quiet afterwards.
The end. Good
Martin's
night.
preaching. Yeah, I love this.
Mic drop.
No, but you're right, man. All these stories have pushed towards this. The Old Testament isn't one-dimensional. Neither is the New Testament. I know I've got listeners out there, and you're furious with me because you don't like my view. This is just my thoughts, All right. If you've got different thoughts, you're probably more right.
Go to our website. Put your name
No,
in.
do not send me
Give
angry.
us some of your thoughts. We want
Yeah,
them.
only tell me I'm pretty. No, but I mean, you're looking at this. This is the and the Old Testament gives us things like this, right? Isaac is offered on the hill, and a lamb is provided, or a ram. We see Jesus in that. We see that God has woven the story to remind us of what's coming. Even like the temple in the tabernacle has these notes of the coming fulfillment of what Jesus is doing. And Hebrews takes us to a whole other level.
Yeah.
We recognize this beautiful instruments playing out the song of the ages, and it's about Christ. The serpent crusher has come. But even then, it has a future fulfillment as well. He is still coming. It is finished. It's already, and it's not yet. There's this beautiful symmetry, but it all focuses in on Jesus. And so by using Joseph and the 5 prophecies in the present and the 5 prophecies of the past, you then start wondering, yeah, but what's next? It's almost like you're hooked, and it's pulling you forward into the story. And so I point this out to you so that you, who are reading the Gospel of Matthew in your groups, look for patterns. Say, hey, man, this reminds me of so-and-so. Does it remind you of that? And then go chase those stories. Talk about them together. Don't worry about getting to the next chapter. Worry about enjoying the conversation and enjoying the message that the Spirit of God has inspired into the text. The kingdom comes not to the proud and the powerful, but it rises up among the outcast and the powerless. Mary and Joseph are a beautiful picture of this. And then when you get to the Sermon on the Mount, it should come right back into your mind when you hit Matthew 6. Look for Old Testament parallels. Does this remind you of another story? Don't view the New Testament as a separate movement, but as the next phase of the same story. I am excited to keep pushing here, and we're actually right on time. You guys thought we wouldn't make it.
That was a really long outline. When I saw it was like 11 pages, I thought, oh boy. But
Big font.
double space.
Double space.
1.75
1.75 spacing, because my eyes make everything blurry because of my oldness. You know, guys, I'm loving this, and I know that Christmas is behind you, but in a very real way, it isn't. Christ is coming, and Christ has come, and he is making all things new. One day there will be a new heaven and a new earth. There's also a beautiful heaven and a beautiful earth around you today. It's not perhaps what you want. Ours, for instance, is covered in snow, and I am waiting eagerly the coming of spring.
At least you didn't wear slippers tonight like I did.
Did you wear slippers?
I
I
didn't wear
warned you
slippers. I
about the
know.
snow. I
I
warned you.
know.
Martin will carry you to your car.
No, I'll
No.
just follow you
No.
again.
I'll take smaller
You
steps.
take little steps because I
so
was
you can walk in
stepping
my
your
footsteps.
Yeah.
Yeah, guys, what I want you to know is that we love you and that Jesus is the God of gods, the King of kings, mighty and awesome.